Charlie, thanks very much. And yes, you're right. I am very excited to be here today, not least because my talk coincides with, as you say, two important points in the calendar, NHS 75, but also more particularly for today, wanting to share some reflections coinciding with Pride Month. So huge thanks to Speakers for Schools for inviting me today.
Yeah, we're very, very excited to have you and really excited to get a chance to interview and get all your thoughts around Pride. So basically to start off, just so that our young people can get to know who you are and kind of where you've come from, could you please tell us about your kind of career journey and then what it is you do now?
Yeah, of course, Charlie. It's interesting. I was thinking last night that in fact I've got sort of two parallel career stories to share with everyone watching today. So professionally, I've been employed in, as you said, through my job titles in marketing and communications, mainly for sort of national government bodies for the last 15 or so years. And prior to then, my sort of main career started out at the BBC, and I spent over 10 years with the BBC. And it was during my BBC career that I really sort of matured as a leader, as a manager, and as somebody who really got into what I'm doing today in communications. And communications, it's a really broad and really interesting area to be employed in. It includes things like public relations, which is working with the media to get your messages across through news media and increasingly, of course, through social media, marketing of campaigns, and I'll talk a bit about that in a moment. I've helped to lead some national campaigns on behalf of government, and also importantly engaging with community groups and stakeholders, and I do a lot of that in the NHS, particularly groups representing patients and people that don't have a natural voice at the top table, so trying to kind of amplify their voice in order to influence the way that NHS services are delivered on their behalf. So today I work for a national NHS organisation called NHS Resolution, and we're in effect the legal arm of the NHS. So we employ about 500 lawyers, and they look at claims that come into the NHS and they look at the evidence if a patient has been harmed through no fault of their own, and we'll work with clinicians and hospital managers to ask what went on, to get the evidence, to look at the extent at which the patient was harmed. And if the patient was harmed through no fault of their own, then we will pay financial compensation in order for them to hopefully get over what happened to them in the operating theatre or elsewhere in the system. And I've got a great team. I joined my current NHS body about sort of 7 years ago. In fact, I had 3 people when I joined. I've now got over 30 people, and recently I've taken on board responsibility for strategy and policy, as well as communications and marketing. So it's a fascinating part of the NHS to work in. Prior to that, I spent a couple of years spearheading a big publicity campaign. I mentioned campaigns earlier, and my campaign was for the government to encourage all UK employers in the country to enrol workers into pension schemes, and this is when we launched what's called auto enrolment pensions. And prior to that, over 10 million workers were not saving regularly for pensions, which would mean, of course, when they retire later in life, they'd be much poorer. So that's a big social legacy of mine. And then another campaign I worked in was in the education sector, which is obviously of interest today. So I worked quite a long time ago as a senior director for an organisation that was basically installing computer technology, ICT, as we called it at the time, in every state school in England and Wales. And this was at the time when things like whiteboards and Wi-Fi systems and laptops were all very cutting edge and new. And my role was to persuade school leaders, such as head teachers and heads of functions and heads of department, and learners and parents to get behind the use of technology. And of course, nowadays you walk into any school across the country and it's a ubiquitous thing. Technology is just the way that we use it for teaching and learning. So that's another great legacy. So that's my professional career. And then alongside that, I've enjoyed time as a local politician for 20 years. I only stood down this time last spring, having served 20 years as a councillor at Westminster City Council in central London, which is where I live. And it was a great experience. I had no idea what I was going into when I was first elected in 2002, very much wide-eyed. And I love going into new experiences and learning on the job, if you like. And this was a great example of doing that. There's no kind of playbook or training for being a local politician. You learn as you go along. And that, again, was about representing people in my community, across the whole community, ensuring they had a voice in terms of how local services were delivered to them, whether it was education or social services or libraries or refuse collection or keeping the streets clean in other ways as well. So it's a really very broad experience. And one of the things that I'm most proud of, having served for 20 years on Westminster Council, and I may talk about this a bit later actually, Charlie, I spent a year as the Lord Mayor of Westminster, which for somebody who comes from a very normal, humble background, I grew up in Liverpool, and my dad worked in a factory. My mum was an administrator in a pharmaceutical company. So from very kind of normal roots, I ended up becoming the Lord Mayor of Westminster, and I met all sorts of VVIPs, which stands for very, very important people, such as the Queen and Prince Philip at the time, and the Prime Minister, and lots of ambassadors who were visiting London. But also I got to know a hidden part of Westminster that ordinarily you wouldn't see, such as visiting homeless shelters and attending school prize givings and meeting older people's groups in local libraries. So it's again a really broad spectrum of experience in that role, and it has a nice link with Pride as well, which I'll talk about a bit later.
Great, thank you for that overview. It's nice to get an idea of where speakers have come from, and you would have no idea that you grew up in Liverpool because you've definitely lost that accent, haven't you?
I have. I've lived in London. So in fact, my story is I moved to London when I was 18, just 18 actually. I was born at my birthday is in July, so I was always one of the youngest in my school year. And I moved to London very, very shortly after turning 18 to then take up a place at for my first degree, which was at the then City of London Polytechnic. And the reason I moved to London was because I wanted to find myself, knowing by then I was gay, and I wanted to sort of find more of my personality through that particular lens by living in London, but also moving to London to study politics and government. I was really interested in politics at the time, hence what I mentioned earlier, going into local government later on as a councillor.
Yeah, awesome. So our next question, kind of leading on from having a think about where you've come from and your career, is, how has being a member of the LGBTQ plus community affected your pathway to becoming a community leader and getting to where you did, whether that was in both roles and both sides that you talked about? How has that kind of been part of the process?
Yeah, again, I thought a lot about this, Charlie, because it throws up a really interesting topic in my mind about personal resilience. And speaking personally, growing up, certainly as a teenager, knowing that I was gay, I think has made me very determined and very resilient. And I've learnt to cope being a member of a minority group, but being able to cope with and through the support that I get, and the love and the support I get through my family and my friends and my professional networks as well. So, when people talk about being resilient, I don't think anyone is resilient as an individual. I think you're really resilient because of those around you, if that makes sense. So I'm really fortunate that I have a great network of support around me. And I hope that they get something back in return. So that kind of two-way street of having a good network as well. Now, what's happened here? We dropped out.
No. Can you? Hello? Okay. I think we might have lost Ian. So if you just give us a second or so, and we will try and get him back for you guys. You are muted, Ian. Thank you for coming back.
You can hear me okay, can you, Charlie? Yeah, I had no idea what happened. But anyway, we were talking about resilience and the network failed, so apologies. There we go.
It's all right. That was a very quick recovery for sure.
Indeed. Well, we'll press on. I'm sure everyone watching is used to technology having moments like that. But in all seriousness, I think the point about resilience is, as I was saying, it's about those around you. So strong support network, absolutely. And also, I suppose, coming back to your question around how being a member of the LGBT plus community has affected my pathway to becoming a community leader, then I think if I built on that platform of resilience to then be a leader in my community. As I said, I stood first in 2002 to be a local authority councillor, and I absolutely used my platform as a leader in the community, as a local councillor, and as the Lord Mayor, as I mentioned earlier, to really promote greater social inclusion and greater understanding among different members and different groups within my local community. And I was very keen to really promote that and bring different groups together to get mutual understanding and respect as well. And again, I think that reflects who I am as a leader and somebody who respects differences. And really, whether it's corporate leadership or community leadership, I think bringing people from different backgrounds, different perspectives together really adds to the richness of life, and you learn a lot from doing that.
Yeah, I definitely think that's so important, and it's something we're seeing more. We want to become more diverse, we want to have more inclusion, but it's kind of getting people to step into those roles and kind of make those changes and start enforcing that and pushing for those around them to kind of be more inclusive and change. And we're seeing that more and more, and I think that's so lovely about our societies, that we're starting to brace that and really put it towards the top of importance where it needs to be. So it's crazy to kind of talk to someone who was doing that before it came such kind of a big and important topic. You were doing this as someone who wanted to make change before so many people even cared about the subject, and that's what's so great to talk to you, I think, particularly during Pride. Yeah, it's really great to talk to someone who has had such kind of a big influence.
Thank you. And again, for young people watching today, hopefully they'll be inspired to get involved in their local communities, not necessarily through local politics, local government. There's all sorts of other ways that people can get involved in local matters and things that I do elsewhere outside of work and my previous political life. Is I am quite active in supporting local charities and other organisations, and again, it'd be great to have some time today to share a bit of that with the audience.
Hopefully we'll get some questions around that a little bit later. So for our next one is how can we build an atmosphere of inclusion regardless of our kind of personal or religious views? How can we make sure we kind of are always aiming to be inclusive of everyone around us?
Yeah, and I think that's a really pertinent question, Charlie, particularly when you bring in the faith element, which you have done through your question about religion. I mean, I think it's everyone's responsibility, everyone's responsibility to show tolerance and respect. And we're all different, we're all individuals. And I was at a national charity event that I'm involved with yesterday at the House of Lords, where we had Lord David Blunkett come and talk about intersectionality, and he did a great talk. So those of you who may not know David Blunkett, when he was a government minister under Tony Blair, who was the last Labour Prime Minister about 15 years ago now, quite a long time ago. And David Blunkett was for a time the Home Secretary, and he's a very interesting individual. He's blind, he's totally blind, has a guide dog with him at all times, but he was talking about from his particular perspective, different aspects of he's a politician, he's a blind individual, he's a disabled person, therefore, etc., and all sorts of different ways of describing himself through that kind of intersectional lens. And coming back to what I was saying around respect for all, we're all individuals at heart, and we all have different elements to who we are, whether it's our gender, our ethnicity, our social background, which I shared a little bit about mine with all of you today, and some of us additionally have faith as an added dimension as to who we are, and I think we need to respect all those different touch points. And I know that faith and religion, it's really important for a lot of people. I'm sure a lot of young people watching today included in that, because it provides people with a sense of who you are, and religion for a lot of people acts as a compass to navigate through life, particularly the challenges that life invariably throws up, and enables us to make sense of life through that particular lens of belief. And I really strongly, speaking personally as a Christian, I believe that all faiths are built on the notion of loving God, or a version of God, and loving one another as creatures of God. So I think if we see ourselves in the guise of being made by God, living as she would want us to, then I think that's a really strong way to kind of cope with life's challenges and absorb and celebrate the differences around us, including, of course, different colours and creeds and different backgrounds of all faiths and nationalities, etc. So I think inclusion as a key topic, which is really what your question is about, inclusion has to be built on showing mutual respect and understanding. And I think organised religion can help to foster this by bringing different people together, not only people of the same faith, but different faiths as well. And when I was the Lord Mayor of Westminster in 2017, I learnt a lot about different religions across London, including Islam and Judaism, and had lots of opportunity to worship alongside people from different faiths as a representative of my whole community in Westminster. So it's a really powerful example of different faiths showing tolerance and understanding to me, not least as I would often attend places of worship accompanied by Christopher, who's my husband, who at the time was the Lord Mayor's Consort. So he got to do lots of things alongside me as well in that official capacity. And I think that itself sent a very powerful signal to those around me about the strength of same-sex relationships within the context of faith and understanding.
Yeah, so kind of great to hear that. And I think sometimes all this stuff can be going on and we never hear about it and we never know about it because the news tends to focus on the bad things that go on. But as someone who lives up north, so far removed from that, and that would have been amazing to just hear of and be a part of, and for your local community, such a kind of an openness of acceptance. I think that's something that we really need, and that young people need as well. We need to see that in our communities. We need to know that that is there for us, no matter what your religion is, no matter what your sexuality is or anything like that. So yeah, thank you for sharing that with us. I think that's really kind of important, and to know about it is also very important as well, because sometimes we have to go hunting for this information. It's not always the easiest to find in our information saturated world. So kind of leading on from that and thinking about pride in general, you've definitely taught us a couple of kind of beautiful kind of stories there, but what does pride mean to you as an individual?
Well, first and foremost, I had the honour of leading the London Pride event in July 2017. Gosh, 6 years ago now, time flies, which was wonderful. So I led the Pride event, invited to do so alongside Christopher and Sadiq Khan, who's the Mayor of London, the elected Mayor of London. And it was a huge experience, 1 million+ people on the streets, great reception, very much a sort of carnival celebratory atmosphere. But of course, going back to its genesis, its origins, I see Pride still as, if you like, a celebration of past protest, given its roots here in the UK back in 1972, starting as a really small, quite modest on the street protest. It was noisy. It had the potential to spill over to violence. Thankfully, it didn't become violent, albeit those men and women who were on the march at the time faced a lot of opposition from the sidelines, from passers-by, members of the public, and derogatory comments from some of the local police officers who were accompanying the march in Westminster, streets of Westminster. But of course, today it is vastly different, and we can't pretend it's vastly different. Pride itself has really evolved into a huge multi-national and multi-million pound venture, certainly in capital cities like London and other big places around the world. So it is vastly different. But of course, I'm also mindful that in other parts of the country, I'm sure where lots of people are watching from today, Pride can be a much smaller, more local, more modest event, and perhaps all the better for it, more grounded and rooted in local communities. So perhaps local prides are perhaps a bit more in keeping with the original spirit of Pride as a protest, but a protest of a celebration of protest today, given the huge strides that the community has both taken and benefited from over the 50 or so years since.
I love that quote there, a celebration of protest. I think it's kind of a lovely juxtaposition to think about when thinking of Pride. Definitely going to be capturing that one and thinking about that. I think we should go away and think about that phrase as we look at Pride, as all the kind of celebrations go over the next few months around the world. So we have just a couple more questions left of our formal interview, and then we'll move on to our Q&A. Please, we've had questions come in. Please do keep coming those in. We love to get them. I know that Ian is very excited to hear these questions that are coming in a little bit later. So thinking about kind of Pride and thinking about society, do you think mainstream media does a good job of representing the LGBTQ plus community, or is there things that we can be doing as a society to have a better representation?
Yeah, again, another really pertinent and topical question, Charlie, particularly given the narrative that's playing out around the whole trans debate currently. Really, really important that you've brought this up. I mean, I think in all truth, compared with countries that don't enjoy a free press, the UK's mainstream media does generally cover LGBTQ issues very, very well. It's great to see organisations like the media have dedicated correspondents to cover LGBTQ issues in the news, which certainly when I was growing up was never the case. So things have definitely moved in the right direction in that regard. But having said that, I think there's always, of course, room for improvement, doing things better, being more representative, in particular, avoiding stereotyping LGBTQ people. And I think, journalists quite often use shorthand descriptions and shorthand metaphors for trying to kind of capture the whole of the community. But of course, as I said earlier on, we're all individuals at heart. And I think some of the nuances about who belongs to the LGBTQ plus community sometimes gets lost in that broader debate. So certainly the media need to work harder at avoiding stereotyping people, and I think they need to work harder at properly analysing and understanding the issues and the impact of being LGBTQ, the impact that has on individuals and those around individuals as well. And I think not least, as I said earlier, how trans people are represented in the media and giving them the voice that I really think they deserve. Otherwise, I think we're at risk of sidelining a significant section of the community. And I was very conscious when I served as the Lord Mayor of Westminster, I deliberately used the news media as a platform to promote greater social inclusion, including promoting issues that were very pertinent at the time to LGBTQ people, such as Pride and gay marriage, and promoting HIV testing as well. So, very much deliberately used my platform unapologetically, but in a positive way, to promote issues that I knew were of relevance and importance to the whole community.
Yes, I love how you said unapologetically there. I think sometimes we need that stand up for what is unapologetically you, to help and benefit those around you, even whether that can be difficult at times. And even if you feel a little bit isolated doing that, if you fully believe that that's what you need to do, definitely be that kind of unapologeticness and hold that as part of you. Really nice. So we've got two questions left. And this one is a little bit of a change in subject, I think, but you have talked about kind of a lot of the work that you've done outside of just your employment. So wanting to kind of touch back on that subject a little bit, you have done so much volunteering, and you are clearly a very great role model. Why have you done so much kind of advocating and encouragement of volunteering, and why is giving back to your community through giving up your time important, and how has that volunteering shaped you personally?
Great, thanks, Charlie. Well, I very much hope that what I'm about to say about volunteering really inspires a lot of people watching today. And there are huge opportunities for young people right across the country to get involved locally as volunteers, whether that's working with local charities, uniform groups, supporting older people's organisations. So, worth just thinking based on what I'm about to say through my own experiences, if it's of interest to you watching. But as I said at the start, I come from a very normal family background. Thankfully, we never went hungry when I was growing up, and my parents taught me the value of hard work and respect for others. And I think really it was that's inspired me to volunteer my time where I can help others in the community, particularly those that are socially isolated or less fortunate than where I am today. And I'm very open when I say that volunteering, I think, has to be two-way. There must be some benefit to people who give up their time, whether it's for charities or in other regards in their communities. So, getting something back from volunteering is absolutely a good and proper thing to expect as a volunteer. And that could be about learning about new things, learning new skills, making some connections, meeting some people that you wouldn't normally have the opportunity to meet. So have a look at it through that lens as well. And I think that really means being enriched as an individual by seeing the benefits and the impact of your volunteering on others, and through that learning how society more widely can provide the right support to those most in need. So, I'm very passionate about volunteering, about giving up my time as a trustee for a number of charities. So, example, I've been a trustee locally here in Westminster, Central London, at my local branch of Age UK, which supports isolated older people. And pleasingly, we're also working specifically supporting older LGBTQ people through that charity as well, which is great to see that. Also, I am vice chair of a London-wide homelessness charity called Single Homeless Project, and we work across all parts of London, helping to divert people from sleeping rough on the streets. And also, it's in the news at the moment with rising rents and mortgages, working with people who do have a home today, but who are at risk of losing their home due to maybe falling behind with rent or mortgage payments. So that's a really important part of my volunteering, because I strongly believe that if somebody has stable housing, a roof over their head, literally, that can lead to all sorts of things in life, such as employment, education as well. So having a home is really critical to people. I lost the link again. What's gone wrong?
We can still see and hear you if you can see and hear us.
I'm back. Good.
Okay.
So thanks, Charlie. So and then just to round off on the sort of things that really motivate me, and I think being motivated as a volunteer is really important as well. Going back to a question, is really working in that space of what I call social justice. So again, advocating for those who are less fortunate, minority groups, those often at the fringes of society. So recently I've been invited and appointed to join the board of Amnesty International, which is a global human rights organisation. So working with a UK-based part of Amnesty International, advocating for people who are less fortunate. These could be prisoners of conscience, refugees, asylum seekers, these people in absolute dire need of help from those more fortunate than they are.
Yeah, thank you for talking to us about kind of the importance of volunteering. I think it really is key, and we need our young people to be invested in giving back. Having worked previously in a couple of other roles before I do now, taking young people out into the communities to volunteer, there's always that attitude of when you're first taking them that they're like, oh, this is gonna not be great and this is gonna be boring, and then by the end of the week they're loving it. So sometimes it's about just giving it a go and testing it, and if you find something that's for you, then it's kind of that encouragement to keep going, and if it's not for you, try something different, because there's so many different ways to volunteer, and it's so important that we are giving back to that community. And nurturing yourself, you'll find yourself joy from helping others as well as helping them as well.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Charlie, I agree wholeheartedly with what you've just said, but a good example of me, both personally and professionally, actually, is one of my very first roles as a volunteer was when I was a student in London, and I volunteered my time to support a lobby group, what at the time was called a pressure group, and I gave my time throughout the whole of my summer break one year, and I learnt a huge number of skills around lobbying and media relations and putting on events and persuading people to change national policy. And it was actually that direct experience as a volunteer that then got me into my whole profession of communications and marketing and engagement. So that's an added benefit of volunteering. Sometimes, it doesn't always have to be the case, but sometimes it can lead you into being employed in a particular field. It's really exciting.
Yes, definitely. So really quick, we're having loads of questions coming, which is great to see. So this final one then is, who or what inspires you?
Again, another brilliant question, Charlie. I don't have any single hero, and I say that very deliberately. I think life is too complex and nuanced for singling out any single person who might be my hero. But what inspires me are other people who do brilliant things to help other people, and that includes some of my teachers when I was at school, friends who've been there for me when I've needed them, and close members of my family who've supported me for being who I am. And I think the one thread that runs throughout this is respect, love, and understanding for one another. And I think that is truly inspiring.
Awesome, thank you. It's been great formal interview. We're going to crack straight on with our questions that have come in from students and teachers, because we've had so many of them. And we're going to start with this one that came in first, and it's a really, really interesting question. Ian, it comes from Crossley Heath School that have asked us quite a few questions, so you'll be hearing that name a lot. And they have asked, with many anti-trans and anti-LGBTQ plus laws being passed in parts of the world, it can be quite scary for LGBTQ plus teens in many parts of the world as they fear for their future. What advice would you give to LGBTQ plus teens to keep going despite social setbacks?
Again, I've worked with quite a few groups in the UK who support those people overseas, those people actually on the front line of championing LGBTQ rights in some really risky jurisdictions, whether it's parts of Africa, parts of the Middle East, or parts of the Far East. And there's a number of things that I would say. One is, e.g., going through back to my work with Amnesty, there are international non-government organisations, whether it's the UN, Amnesty, or similar, who do provide infrastructure and support for people on the ground, and reaching out, ensuring that those people have some safe safe support to lean back on. And if people do get into, in kind of extreme examples, into difficulty, particularly if it's in risk of incarceration, of being locked away, then that's why those groups exist, and that's why I'm involved in some of those groups as well. Interestingly, when I was Lord Mayor, I worked closely with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, which is the branch of the UK government that has overseas offices all over the world, ambassadors and what have you. And again, through that network, the UK government, working with other Western democratic countries, again, they can influence what goes on the ground in these other nations. But it's not easy. It's not easy at all. And I think we should be very mindful of the risks of just being LGBTQ in countries where, I think there's over 70 countries where currently it is illegal to being a practicing homosexual, and therefore to express your love to another human being, and that cannot be right today. And I'll continue to advocate and continue to put pressure on those governments, on those jurisdictions through the channels that I have access to.
I think that's a really great point there. And personally, as an ally, I always make sure if I'm ever going on holiday, I like to look that up. And if a country that I want to visit has a law where it's illegal, I choose not to go and give my money to that, because I just feel so strongly that I don't want to go to that country where it's dangerous for some of my friends and family, people very close to me, that they would be hurt if they were to come with me. And I think that the idea of that is too much for me, so I choose not to do that, because it's just so scary. And I would never want one of my friends to be in a position where they couldn't go somewhere or do something. So that's what I do as an ally if I am going to some of these countries, is always to make sure that anyone and everyone would be safe while there. So our next question then, because we've got tons that have come in. So one has come in from the Griffin School, and they have asked, where have you faced prejudice and discrimination because of your sexuality? Do you hold any resentment towards those people, and how have you overcome this?
Yeah, I was talking to somebody yesterday from the Black community, and we got onto the topic of microaggressions. And microaggressions they're quite subtle forms of discrimination, and they often happen on a day-to-day basis, and they can be reactions from other people when you tell them who you are. I might just drop into a conversation that I was out last night with my husband, or that I'm off meeting a particular group later on today, and some people can just be a little bit sniffy or a little bit dismissive about that. I think, again, going back to the resilience piece that we talked about earlier, Charlie, I think it comes down to it's self-respect, but also using the opportunity to stand your ground, and in a polite but firm way, ensure that people don't sort of leave the conversation with a wrong view about you, and the fact that you are in my case, gay, married, what have you. I want people to know that. I think it's really important that people can go away and think, oh, well, he's a very senior leader in his community. He's a very senior director in the NHS. He's a very senior trustee on a number of major charity boards. Oh, and he's gay. So I want people just to kind of get that into their heads, that it's very, very possible today to be successful in our society here in the UK, regardless of sexuality, and I hope regardless of ethnicity, and particularly gender as well. I think it's incumbent upon all of us to really beat the drum of equality.
Certainly. Really great points there. Again, I'm going to jump on so we get as many questions in. So our next one then is come from Ormston Forge Academy, and they have asked, one of our students has asked how someone may know that they are a member of the LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah, and again, I think this comes back to the respect point. I mean, different people who are, particularly during teenage years, coming to terms with their sexuality, and we know there's a whole spectrum of sexuality, which is why we refer to the community in the way that we do today, and I think that's the right thing to do to acknowledge those differences. I think it's around treating the individual as an individual, and different people will want to come to terms and come out on their own terms. I don't think anybody should ever be forced to come out through inappropriate questioning. So I've done a lot of work, for example, in the social housing sector when I was a cabinet member for housing in Westminster, and we trained our frontline housing workers not to ask inappropriate questions if two young women or two young men turned up to the housing desk seeking emergency accommodation because they were homeless, and not making an assumption that it was two sisters or two brothers or two cousins. And it would be up to the individuals to declare whether or not they were in any form of relationship, but that's not the point. I mean, that shouldn't have been a factor in terms of providing housing to them. So, my lesson to all of us, please, is to show respect, be patient, give people time and space and the support they need. It's not easy, really isn't easy, growing up as a gay teenager. I was bullied at school myself to some extent, name called and all that, and I'm conscious that carries on today. So if you know that young people, colleagues and students alongside you are suffering and on the receiving end, then get in and support them, but also give them a bit of space and respect as well.
Thank you for that one. I think we have time just for one or two more questions before we have to move to our wrap up. So thank you for all the questions that have come in. These are so great, and it's we won't be able to get time to answer all of them, but we're definitely going to read through these after a little bit later as well. So we'll go for our next question, which has come from Crossley Heath School, and they have asked, what advice would you give to LGBTQ plus teens if they are being bullied? Oh, sorry, my question just moved. Just 1 second. Or made fun of about their sexuality or gender. So I know you just touched on it, so I think it's great to, what can someone do if they are kind of in that position?
Yeah, well, I would hope, as I'm sure you do in your school, that you get a lot of support from your teaching staff and those other professionals within the school. So, you should not be kind of operating in a bubble. I hope you get support from trusted teachers, both pastorally and in other regards. So that's the first thing. I think I would encourage throughout the whole curriculum for LGBTQ issues to be brought into the mainstream, whether it's purely the images that you might see in an art class or a social sciences class of same-sex couples, and normalizing and regularizing the imagery and what those images represent. So in other words, over time, people's generally, straight couples in particular, are kind of used to seeing images of LGBT people in all sorts of different guises. Quick answer to a really complex question, Charlie, and I appreciate we could have carried on with that answer and lots of other Q's and A's today, but I'll hand back to you briefly.
Okay, great. I know we're definitely out of time here, but I just wanted to finish on a really nice, quick, positive question, which has come from Somerset Studio, and it's simply, what would you say is the most practical, helpful thing a school can do to help celebrate diversity and inclusion?
Well, here we are in the midst of Pride Month 2023, so I would hope that the school, in whatever way is appropriate to you, gets behind Pride. That could be engaging as you're doing today, obviously, in a talk such as this Speakers for Schools presentation. Maybe from today, have a further conversation within different classes and assemblies. There are lots of questions, as Charlie said, that we haven't had time to look at today. So use today as a bit of a platform for continuing the conversation and have a bit of fun as well. Have a bit of fun.
So wonderful. Is there anything else you'd like to say to our students before we end today's session?
Well, I'd like first and foremost, Charlie, to thank you and Speakers for Schools for inviting me. As I said at the start, great to have the opportunity, very pertinent, and lots of important topics, important points that we've had a chance to discuss today. And also huge thanks to the audience for being involved today. And I only apologise that between us we couldn't get through all of your Q's and A's, but as Charlie said, I think we'll be looking at those a bit later on.
We certainly will. Thank you so much for joining us, Ian. It's been great to have you, and it's been so wonderful. What a great broadcast to have as part of this year's Pride campaign. Just so happy with it, and I hope you're happy with all the questions that have come in. I will send you all those extras if you want to have a look at them. It's been so wonderful. So thank you for giving up the time and joining us.